The black Bentley pulled up to the glass doors of Milano's, the most expensive restaurant in the entire city. The driver quickly got out and opened the door for his passenger. Out stepped a man in a perfectly pressed navy suit, his silver watch catching the light as he checked the time. This was David Rodriguez, one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the country, and everyone knew it. David had built his fortune from nothing, creating apps that millions of people used every day, but success had changed him. Where he once remembered what it felt like to struggle, now he only saw dollar signs and business opportunities. His employees whispered about his legendary temper, how he could fire someone for the smallest mistake without blinking an eye as he walked through Milano's entrance. The restaurant manager practically ran to greet him. "Mr. Rodriguez, welcome back. Your private dining room is ready, just as you requested." The man's hands shook slightly as he spoke. Everyone who worked in the service industry knew David's reputation. He demanded perfection, and if he didn't get it, heads would roll. Milano's wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where a single meal could cost more than most people made in a month. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow patterns across white marble floors. Fresh orchids sat on every table, and the walls were decorated with paintings worth more than most people's houses. But the real centerpiece of Milano's was the piano. It sat in the center of the main dining room like a beautiful white swan. This wasn't just any piano either. It was a genuine Steinway Grand worth more than a luxury car. The restaurant's owner had bought it from a famous concert hall, and it was tuned every single week by a master craftsman. The piano wasn't just for show, though nobody was allowed to touch it without permission. Sometimes on special occasions, Milano's would hire professional musicians to play during dinner service, but tonight wasn't one of those nights. Tonight the piano sat silent and untouched, its polished surface reflecting the soft lighting like a mirror. David walked past the piano without giving it a second glance. His mind was focused on one thing, the business meeting that could make him even richer than he already was. He had spent months setting up this dinner with a group of investors from Japan. They represented some of the biggest companies in Asia, and they were looking to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in American technology. "Has the Yamamoto Group arrived yet?" David asked the manager as they walked toward the private dining room. His voice was sharp and businesslike, with no warmth or politeness. "Not yet, sir, but they should be here within the next 15 minutes, the manager replied, trying to keep up with David's quick pace. "We've prepared the menu exactly as you specified. The chef has been working on it all day." David nodded, but didn't say thank you. In his world, people were paid to do their jobs perfectly, and he saw no reason to thank them for doing what they were supposed to do anyway. He had forgotten what it was like to appreciate the hard work of others. The private dining room was separated from the main restaurant by elegant glass doors. Inside, a long table was set with the finest china and crystal glasses. Fresh flowers decorated the center of the table, and soft jazz music played from hidden speakers. Everything was perfect, exactly as David had demanded. As David settled into his chair and began reviewing his presentation notes, the kitchen staff worked frantically to prepare the evening's meal. The head chef had planned a 7-course dinner, featuring the most expensive ingredients money could buy. There would be lobster flown in from Maine that morning, beef from Japan that cost more per pound than most people's weekly groceries, and wine from bottles that were older than some of the staff members. In the main dining room, the regular evening service was beginning. Well-dressed couples were being seated at tables, their quiet conversations mixing with the gentle sound of classical music. The atmosphere was calm and sophisticated, exactly what Milano's was known for. The waitstaff moved through the restaurant like dancers, each one trained to be nearly invisible while providing perfect service. They wore crisp black uniforms and moved with practiced grace, refilling water glasses before they were empty and clearing plates the moment diners finished eating. But tonight was different. Tonight there was tension in the air that the regular customers couldn't quite identify. The staff members kept glancing toward the private dining room where David waited for his guests. They knew that their jobs could depend on everything going perfectly for this one meal. The restaurant manager walked through the dining room one final time, checking every detail. He straightened a fork here, adjusted a flower arrangement there, and made sure every wine glass sparkled without a single fingerprint. He had worked in the restaurant business for over 20 years, and he had never been as nervous about a single dinner as he was tonight. Back in the kitchen, the chef tasted every sauce and checked every plate before it left his station. His sous chefs moved around him with military precision, each one focused on their specific tasks. The timing had to be perfect. David Rodriguez was not the kind of man who accepted excuses or delays. As the evening progressed, other diners began filling the main restaurant. There were business executives celebrating deals, couples on anniversary dinners, and families marking special occasions. The soft lighting and elegant atmosphere created the perfect setting for important conversations and memorable moments. The beautiful white piano continued to sit in the center of it all, its presence both commanding and peaceful. Its keys were perfectly clean, each one waiting to create music if the right person came along to play them. But for now, it remained silent, a sleeping giant in the heart of Milano's. Outside, the Japanese investor's car pulled up to the restaurant entrance. David's assistant had told him they were traditional businessmen who valued respect, patience, and attention to detail. This dinner wasn't just about money for them. It was about finding partners they could trust and respect. David checked his watch again and straightened his tie. In just a few minutes, his guests would arrive and the most important business dinner of his career would begin. He had no idea that before the night was over, his entire perspective on life would be completely changed by a moment of unexpected beauty and his own cruel reaction to it. The stage was set for an evening that would start with promise and end with a lesson that David Rodriguez would never forget. 3 blocks away from Milano's, in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, 23-year-old Maria was getting ready for another long shift. She looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror and tried to hide the dark circles under her eyes. With makeup she couldn't really afford. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves but from exhaustion. She had been working 3 different jobs for the past 8 months, and her body was starting to show the strain. Maria pulled her long black hair back into a neat ponytail and put on her Milano's uniform. The black dress and white apron looked professional, but they couldn't hide how thin she had become. She'd barely had time to eat between her jobs at the restaurant, the coffee shop, and the overnight cleaning company. Every dollar she earned went straight to the hospital for her mother's cancer treatments. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at Milano's. "Extra shift tonight. Big VIP dinner. Need all hands. Can you stay late?" Maria's heart sank. She was supposed to work at the cleaning company after her restaurant shift, but Milano's paid better, and she desperately needed every penny she could get. She quickly texted back, "Yes, I'll stay." Then she called her other job to cancel her shift, knowing it might cost her that job entirely. But her mother's medical bills were piling up faster than she could pay them, and she had no choice. Before leaving her apartment, Maria stopped by her mother's bedroom. The older woman was sleeping, her face pale and thin from months of chemotherapy. Medicine bottles covered the nightstand, each one representing another expense that Maria somehow had to cover. Her mother had been a music teacher before getting sick, and even now, classical music played softly from a small radio beside her bed. "I'll be home late tonight, Mama," Maria whispered, even though her mother couldn't hear her. "But I'm going to get us through this, I promise." Maria had once been a music student herself. She had spent 4 years at the city's prestigious music conservatory, learning to play piano at a level most people could only dream of. Her professors had told her she had real talent, the kind that could take her to concert halls around the world. But when her mother got sick, everything changed. The medical bills started small at first. A few $100s here and there for tests and doctor visits. But when the cancer was diagnosed, the costs exploded. Even with insurance, the treatments, medications, and specialist visits were crushing their family financially. Maria had been forced to drop out of school and sell her beloved piano just to make the first payment. That piano had been her most precious possession. It was an old upright that her grandmother had passed down to her mother and then to her. The keys were slightly yellowed with age, and some of the hammers needed adjusting, but it had the most beautiful, warm sound. Maria had spent countless hours practicing on it, preparing for recitals and competitions. The day she sold it was one of the hardest of her life. A young family with a daughter who was just starting piano lessons had bought it. Maria watched through tears as the movers carried her piano out of their apartment, knowing she was watching her dreams leave with it. Now, 8 months later, her fingers ached to touch piano keys again. Sometimes, when she walked past music stores, she would stop and look at the instruments in the windows. Her hands would move slightly as if playing invisible melodies in the air. But those moments of longing had to be pushed aside. There was no time for music when survival was at stake. Maria grabbed her purse and the envelope containing this month's hospital bill. $7,000. She had managed to pay about half of it, but the rest was due in 2 weeks. If she couldn't come up with the money, her mother's treatments might be stopped. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. The bus ride to Milano's took 30 minutes, and Maria used the time to study for the exam she was taking to become a medical billing specialist. It was a job that would pay better than waitressing. But the certification course cost money she didn't have and time she could barely spare. Still, she studied whenever she could, hoping that maybe, someday, she could have a stable career that would allow her to take care of her mother properly. When Maria arrived at Milano's, the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. The manager, Mr. Thompson, was more stressed than usual, barking orders at the staff and checking every detail twice. The kitchen staff moved with unusual urgency, and the other waitresses looked nervous. "Maria, thank goodness you're here," said Jessica, one of the senior waitresses. "We've got David Rodriguez coming in tonight with some major investors from Japan. Mr. Thompson is freaking out because this guy is known for destroying people's careers if everything isn't perfect." Maria had heard of David Rodriguez. Everyone in the city knew about the tech billionaire who had started with nothing and built an empire. But she had also heard the stories about his temper and how he treated service workers. The thought of dealing with someone like that made her already exhausted mind feel even more tired. "What do I need to know?" Maria asked, tying her apron and getting ready to work. "Just stay invisible," Jessica warned. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make any noise, and whatever you do, don't mess anything up." This guy once had a waiter fired because he put the wrong fork on the table. Maria nodded and got to work. She spent the next hour helping to set up the private dining room and making sure every glass was spotless. Her hands, which had once played complicated classical pieces with ease, now focused on folding napkins and polishing silverware with the same attention to detail. As she worked, Maria caught glimpses of the beautiful white piano in the main dining room. It was magnificent, far more impressive than her old upright had ever been. The Steinway gleamed under the restaurant's soft lighting, its pristine keys calling to her like an old friend. She found herself walking past it more often than necessary, always finding some excuse to be in the main dining room. Each time she felt a pull toward the instrument that was almost physical. Her fingers would twitch slightly, muscle memory trying to remember the feeling of creating music. During a brief break, Maria learned more about David Rodriguez from the other staff members. They painted a picture of a man who had forgotten where he came from, someone who treated people as disposable and measured everything by its dollar value. The stories made her grateful for her own family's values, even though they had so little money. As the evening approached and the Japanese investors were expected to arrive, the tension in the restaurant grew thicker. Maria could see the fear in her coworkers' eyes. They all needed their jobs desperately, and they all knew that one mistake tonight could cost them everything. Maria checked her phone and saw a text from the hospital. Her mother's next treatment was scheduled for Monday, and the payment needed to be made by Friday. 3 more days to somehow find $3,500. The weight of that responsibility sat on her shoulders like a heavy stone. But she pushed the worry aside and got back to work. She had no idea that in just a few hours, her life would change completely. and that the beautiful piano she kept admiring would be the key to a transformation she never could have imagined. The dinner service was in full swing when Maria finally got her first real break of the evening. David Rodriguez and his Japanese guests had been seated in the private dining room for over an hour, and so far everything had gone perfectly. The appetizers had been served without incident, the wine had been poured to exact specifications, and Mr. Thompson had stopped looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead and checked the time. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and she had been on her feet for 6 straight hours. Her lower back ached, and her feet felt like they were on fire inside her worn-out work shoes. But the tips had been good tonight, and every dollar brought her closer to paying her mother's medical bills. "Take 5 minutes," Jessica told her as they passed each other in the hallway. "The main course won't be ready for another 10 minutes, and they're deep in conversation anyway. You look like you're about to collapse." Maria nodded gratefully and walked toward the employee break room, but something made her stop in the main dining room instead. The regular dinner crowd had thinned out, with only a few couples remaining at their tables, speaking in quiet voices over dessert and coffee. The lighting had been dimmed for the evening atmosphere, and the restaurant felt calm and peaceful. And there, in the center of it all, sat the piano. Maria found herself walking toward it almost without realizing what she was doing. Her feet carried her across the marble floor as if they had a mind of their own. The Steinway looked even more beautiful in the soft evening light, its white surface glowing like fresh snow under the chandeliers. She stopped about 3 feet away from the bench and just stared at the instrument. It was perfect in every way. The keys were arranged in their familiar pattern, black and white, waiting for someone to bring them to life. The music stand was empty, but Maria didn't need sheet music. She had hundreds of pieces memorized, stored away in her mind like treasures in a vault. Her hands began to move slightly, fingers positioning themselves as if they were actually touching keys. Muscle memory from years of practice took over, and she found herself silently playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her mother's favorite pieces. It was the same piece her mother used to request whenever Maria practiced at home, the melody that had filled their small apartment during happier times. Maria glanced around the dining room. The remaining customers were absorbed in their own conversations, and the other staff members were busy in the kitchen or the private dining room. No one was paying attention to her. For just a moment, she was alone with the piano. Almost without thinking, Maria sat down on the bench. The leather was soft and well-maintained, and the height was adjusted perfectly. She positioned her feet on the pedals and placed her hands just above the keys, not quite touching them yet. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from anticipation. It had been 8 months since she had touched a piano. 8 months since she had created music instead of just remembering it. She thought about her mother, lying in the hospital bed that afternoon for another round of chemotherapy. The treatments made her so weak that she could barely speak sometimes, but she always smiled when Maria hummed classical melodies while helping her eat or get dressed. Music had been the language of love in their family, the way they communicated feelings that words couldn't express. Maria's fingers finally touched the keys. The first note was soft, barely audible, as if she was testing whether the piano was real or just a dream. But the sound was beautiful, rich, and warm, exactly what she had hoped for. Her right hand found the opening melody of the Nocturne, and the familiar notes filled the quiet restaurant like liquid gold. As she played, 8 months of suppressed emotion poured out through her fingertips. Every fear about her mother's illness, every sleepless night worrying about money, every moment of exhaustion from working multiple jobs, all of it flowed into the music. The melody was sad but beautiful, like tears that somehow brought comfort. Her left hand joined in, adding the gentle accompaniment that made the piece complete. The harmony wrapped around the melody like a warm embrace, creating layers of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant. Maria closed her eyes and let herself disappear into the music, forgetting for a moment about everything else in her life. The Nocturne was a piece about longing and loss, but also about finding beauty in sadness. As Maria played, she thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to love classical music. She thought about her mother's dreams of becoming a professional pianist, dreams that had been set aside to raise a family. And she thought about her own abandoned dreams, the concert halls she would never see, the audiences she would never move to tears with her playing. But even as she played about loss, Maria felt something else: hope. The music reminded her that beauty still existed in the world, even when everything seemed dark and difficult. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace, muscle memory guiding her through passages she had practiced thousands of times years ago. The sound of the piano seemed to transform the entire restaurant. The remaining diners stopped their conversations and turned to listen, their faces softening as the melody washed over them. One elderly couple held hands across their table, remembering their own younger days when music had been the soundtrack. To their romance, Maria played with increasing confidence, her technique returning as if she had never stopped practicing. The months of physical labor had actually strengthened her hands, and her fingers moved with even more precision than she remembered. Every note was clear and purposeful, every phrase shaped with the skill of someone who truly understood the music. As the piece moved toward its climax, Maria felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of making music again. It was like coming home after a long journey, like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Her soul, which had been compressed and constrained by months of struggle, finally had room to expand again. The melody began to wind down toward its peaceful conclusion, each note floating in the air before fading into silence. Maria played the final phrase with infinite tenderness, her fingers caressing the keys like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. When the last note disappeared, she sat perfectly still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. The restaurant was completely silent except for the soft sound of her breathing. Even the kitchen seemed to have gone quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath after experiencing something magical. Maria opened her eyes and looked around the dining room. The few remaining customers were staring at her with expressions of wonder and appreciation. She realized what she had done and felt a sudden wave of panic. She wasn't supposed to touch the piano. She was just a waitress, and this was a priceless instrument in an exclusive restaurant. But before she could stand up and apologize, she heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps behind her. Someone had been listening from the doorway. Someone who had heard every note of her performance. Maria's heart began to race as she turned around, expecting to see Mr. Thompson's angry face and knowing that her job was probably over. Instead, she found herself looking at something much worse: David Rodriguez himself, his face red with fury, his eyes blazing with anger that seemed to fill the entire room. David Rodriguez stood in the doorway like a storm cloud ready to explode. His face was darker than Maria had ever seen on another human being, and his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. The veins in his neck were visible, pulsing, with anger that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was low and dangerous, each word carefully controlled but dripping with fury. The few remaining diners in the restaurant turned to look. Sensing that something terrible was about to happen, Maria jumped up from the piano bench, so quickly that she nearly knocked it over. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to what?" David's voice exploded across the restaurant, so loud that glasses seemed to rattle on nearby tables. "You didn't mean to touch a piano worth more than you'll make in your entire pathetic life? You didn't mean to interrupt the most important business meeting I've ever had with your noise." The word noise hit Maria like a physical blow. 8 months of exhaustion, stress, and worry suddenly crashed down on her at once. She had poured her heart and soul into that music, had shared something beautiful and meaningful, and he was calling it noise. "Sir, I was just—" she tried to explain, but David cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Just what? Just being selfish? Just thinking that your little hobby was more important than a $50 million business deal?" David stepped closer too. His expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. Do you have any idea what you've done? Maria looked around desperately, hoping to see Mr. Thompson or one of the other managers, someone who might be able to calm David down or at least stand between them. But the restaurant staff had seemingly vanished, probably hiding in the kitchen. Until this nightmare was over. The remaining customers watched with a mixture of fascination and horror, like people watching a car accident they couldn't look away from. I said I was sorry, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but she was trying desperately not to cry in front of this man who already thought she was weak and worthless. Sorry? David laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was cold and cruel, like breaking glass. Sorry doesn't fix what you've done. Sorry doesn't bring back the investors who just walked out of my meeting because they were distracted by some waitress playing dress-up at a piano she has no business touching. The words hit Maria like punches. She felt smaller and smaller with each insult, as if she was shrinking under the weight of his anger. This was exactly what she had been afraid would happen. She had let her guard down for just a few minutes, had allowed herself to remember what it felt like to make music, and now everything was falling apart. The piano was just sitting there, she said weakly, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left her mouth. Just sitting there? David's voice rose even higher. That piano is a work of art? It's worth more than your apartment, your car, probably everything you own put together. You don't just sit down and play it like it's some toy in a children's playground. Maria's tears finally started to fall, streaming down her cheeks as she stood there taking his verbal assault. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about the medical bills that were due in 3 days, about the certification exam she was studying for between jobs. All of it seemed to be crumbling around her because she had made one terrible mistake. Please, she whispered, I need this job. My mother is sick, and I have to pay for her treatments. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll work extra shifts. I'll clean the whole restaurant for free. Just please don't fire me. But her words only seemed to make David angrier. Your mother? Your problems? He stepped even closer, towering over her small frame. You think I care about your sob story? You think everyone should feel sorry for you because you have bills to pay? Everyone has problems? The difference is that some of us work to solve them instead of making more problems for other people. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Maria had dealt with difficult customers before, people who were rude or demanding, but she had never encountered anything like this. David wasn't just angry. He seemed to enjoy hurting her, as if her pain was somehow satisfying to him. You know what you are, David continued, his voice getting louder with each word. You're nothing. You're a nobody who will never be anything more than a waitress in someone else's restaurant. You had dreams of being a musician? Look around, this is reality. You clean up other people's messes and bring them food, and that's all you'll ever do. Each word was designed to cut deep, to destroy not just her confidence but her very sense of self-worth. Maria felt like she was drowning in his anger, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The beautiful moment she had experienced while playing the piano seemed like it had happened to someone else, in some other lifetime. I want you out of here, David said, pointing toward the door. Right now. Get your things and leave, and don't ever come back. And don't think about using this place as a reference, because I'll make sure every restaurant in this city knows exactly what kind of employee you are. The threat hit Maria like a physical blow. If David blacklisted her from the restaurant industry, she would lose not just this job, but any chance of getting another one like it. The tips at Milano's were the only thing keeping her mother's medical payments current. Without this income, everything would fall apart. Please, she said again, her voice breaking. You don't understand? I can't lose this job. My mother needs surgery next month, and if I can't pay for it, not my problem, David said coldly. He pulled out his phone and started typing. I'm texting your manager right now. You're finished. Here, security will escort you out if you're not gone in the next 60 seconds. Maria looked around the restaurant one more time, at the beautiful piano that had given her such joy just moments before, at the elegant surroundings that had seemed like a palace when she first started working there. Now it all felt like a prison, a place where her dreams had come to die. She started to walk toward the staff area to get her purse and coat, her legs barely supporting her weight. Behind her, she could hear David talking loudly to someone on his phone, probably telling the story of the stupid waitress who had ruined his important dinner. She could hear him using words like unprofessional and completely inappropriate, and never should have been hired in the first place. As Maria reached the doorway that led to the staff area, she heard something that made her stop. Another voice speaking quietly but firmly in accented English. She turned around and saw an elderly Japanese man standing near David, his posture straight and dignified despite his age. "Excuse me," the man said politely, "but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." David stopped talking on his phone and looked at the man with surprise. This was Mr. Yamamoto, the lead investor from the group David had been trying to impress all evening. The man whose approval could make David even richer than he already was. "Mr. Yamamoto," David said, quickly changing his tone to one of forced politeness. "I apologize for this disruption. I was just handling a personnel issue. Please, let's return to our meeting." But Mr. Yamamoto didn't move toward the private dining room. Instead, he looked directly at Maria, who was still standing frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Young lady," he said gently, "was that you playing the piano just now?" Maria wiped her tears with the back of her hand and nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, that was me. I'm sorry if I disturbed your dinner. I know I shouldn't have touched the piano." Mr. Yamamoto studied her face for a long moment, his dark eyes kind but penetrating. He was a small man, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of wisdom earned through decades of experience. Unlike David, who radiated aggression and impatience, Mr. Yamamoto had an aura of calm that seemed to fill the space around him. "Please," he said gently, gesturing toward the piano, "don't apologize for creating something beautiful." David's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Mr. Yamamoto, I assure you this won't happen again. This employee has already been terminated, and she be removed from the premises immediately. Let's not let this incident affect our business discussion." But Mr. Yamamoto held up his hand in a polite but firm gesture that made David stop talking mid-sentence. "Mr. Rodriguez, if you would permit me, I would like to speak with this young woman for a moment." The request was phrased politely, but there was something in Mr. Yamamoto's tone that made it clear this wasn't really a question. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He was clearly torn between his desire to get rid of Maria immediately and his desperate need to keep his potential investor happy. "Of course," David said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you'd like to discuss." Mr. Yamamoto turned back to Maria, completely ignoring David's obvious frustration. "What is your name, young lady?" "Maria, sir, Maria Gonzalez." Her voice was still, shaky from David's verbal attack, but something about the elderly man's gentle demeanor was helping her feel a little less afraid. "Maria," Mr. Yamamoto repeated, as if testing how the name sounded. "That was Chopin you were playing, wasn't it? The Nocturne in E-flat major?" Maria's eyes widened with surprise. She hadn't expected anyone in the restaurant to recognize the piece, much less identify it so specifically. "Yes, sir." "How did you know?" A small smile appeared on Mr. Yamamoto's face. "I have been listening to classical music for most of my life. My late wife was a pianist, and that particular nocturne was one of her favorites. When I heard you playing it just now, I felt as though she was in the room with me again." The words hit Maria right in the heart. She had chosen that piece because it reminded her of her mother, and now she learned that it had the same effect on this stranger. Music really was a universal language, capable of connecting people across cultures and generations. "Your wife must have been very talented," Maria said softly. "She was," Mr. Yamamoto replied, his eyes growing distant for a moment. "But talent alone is not enough. Music must come from the heart, and technical skill must be combined with genuine emotion. What I heard in your playing was both of these things." David shifted impatiently nearby, clearly wanting to interrupt, but Mr. Yamamoto continued as if he wasn't there. Tell me, Maria, where did you study music? I went to the city conservatory for 4 years, Maria answered, surprised by the man's genuine interest. I was studying to be a concert pianist, but I had to leave school when my mother got sick. I needed to work to help pay for her medical treatments. Mr. Yamamoto nodded slowly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. And how long has it been since you've played seriously? 8 months, Maria admitted, the words feeling heavy as she spoke them. I had to sell my piano to help pay the medical bills. Tonight was the first time I've touched any piano since then. 8 months, Mr. Yamamoto repeated thoughtfully. And yet your technique was flawless. Your interpretation was mature and emotional. Most importantly, you played with the kind of passion that cannot be taught in any school. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of recognition, of being truly seen and understood by someone who appreciated what music meant to her. David finally couldn't contain himself any longer. Mr. Yamamoto, I'm sure this is all very interesting, but we really should return to our business discussion. The other members of your investment group are waiting, and we still have several important topics to cover. Mr. Yamamoto turned to look at David, and for the first time since entering the main dining room, his expression wasn't entirely friendly. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. My colleagues and I have decided not to move forward with the investment opportunity. The color drained from David's face so quickly that Maria thought he might faint. What? But why? I thought everything was going well. The presentation, the financials, everything was exactly what you requested. The business proposal was indeed thorough, Mr. Yamamoto replied calmly. But you see, when we invest in a company, we're not just investing in products or profit margins. We're investing in people. We're investing in values and character. David looked completely confused. I don't understand what you're saying. Mr. Yamamoto gestured toward Maria, who was still standing near the doorway, uncertain whether she should leave or stay. What I witnessed here tonight tells me everything I need to know about your character. Mr. Rodriguez, when faced with a moment of unexpected beauty, your first instinct was not appreciation, but anger. When confronted with someone in a difficult situation, your first response was not compassion, but cruelty. But she violated restaurant policy, David protested weakly. She touched expensive equipment without permission. Any responsible business owner would have reacted the same way, would they? Mr. Yamamoto asked quietly. A truly wise leader would have recognized talent when he saw it. A person of character would have shown understanding for someone struggling to care for a sick family member. Instead, you chose humiliation and threats. David's face went through a range of emotions, confusion, anger, and finally desperate panic as he realized what was happening. Mr. Yamamoto, surely we can discuss this. One employee situation shouldn't affect a major business partnership. I can explain my actions, I can make changes to how we handle staff issues, but Mr. Yamamoto was already shaking his head. In my country, we have a saying, a tree is known by its fruit. Tonight, I have seen the fruit of your leadership, and I find it lacking. The elderly man walked slowly back toward the private dining room, then paused and turned around. Maria, would you mind staying for a few more minutes? I would very much like to continue our conversation. Maria looked back and forth between Mr. Yamamoto and David, completely overwhelmed by what was happening. 10 minutes ago, she had been facing unemployment and financial ruin. Now somehow, this stranger was treating her like she mattered, like her music had value. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I'd be honored to speak with you. As Mr. Yamamoto disappeared into the private dining room, presumably to inform his colleagues of their decision, David stood alone in the main restaurant. His $50 million deal was gone, destroyed not by market conditions or competitive pricing, but by his own cruelty toward a young woman, who had done nothing more than create a moment of beauty in an otherwise ordinary evening. Maria remained near the piano, still not quite believing what had just happened. The instrument that had gotten her into so much trouble might somehow have also saved her life. and the elderly Japanese man who had defended her was still a mystery. But one thing was clear: he understood music in a way that few people did. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, he wanted to help her. The silence in the restaurant was profound, broken only by the sound of David's heavy breathing and the distant clatter of dishes being cleaned in the kitchen. Everything had changed in the span of just a few minutes, and Maria had the feeling that her life would never be the same again. David stood frozen in the middle of the restaurant, staring at the doorway where Mr. Yamamoto had disappeared. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. $50 million, gone just like that, because of a waitress and a piano and a moment that had lasted less than 5 minutes. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and started scrolling through his contacts. Maybe he could call his assistant, have her reach out to other investors. Maybe there was still time to salvage something from this disaster. But even as he searched for solutions, a cold reality was settling in his stomach like a stone. The Japanese investment group hadn't just been any investors. They were the biggest fish he had ever tried to catch, representing connections to markets throughout Asia that could have expanded his company beyond anything he had ever imagined. Without their backing, several projects would have to be canceled. Expansion plans would be put on hold, and worst of all, his competitors would hear about this failure. In the private dining room, Mr. Yamamoto was speaking quietly with his 3 colleagues in rapid Japanese. Maria couldn't understand the words, but she could see through the glass doors that the conversation was serious. The other men were nodding, occasionally glancing toward the main restaurant where she and David were standing. Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, had finally emerged from wherever he had been hiding during the confrontation. His face was pale as he approached David, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said carefully, "is there anything I can do to help resolve this situation? Perhaps if I spoke to the young lady, explained the restaurant's policies more clearly." David turned on him with eyes full of rage. "You want to help? You can start by explaining how you hired someone so completely unprofessional. Do you have any idea what this has cost me?" Mr. Thompson's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "Sir, Maria is actually one of our best employees. She's never had any problems before tonight. She's reliable, hardworking, and the customers usually love her." "Well, she just cost me the biggest deal of my career," David snapped. "So your best employee just destroyed both of our futures." Meanwhile, Maria stood near the piano, still trying to understand what was happening to her life. 20 minutes ago, she had been a struggling waitress with an impossible financial burden. Then she had made the worst mistake of her working life by touching the piano. But somehow that mistake had led to this moment where a stranger was defending her against one of the most powerful men in the city. The other diners in the restaurant were watching everything unfold like it was a movie. Some of them had started recording with their phones when David began shouting, and Maria realized with horror that this scene might end up on social media. The last thing she needed was to become famous for getting yelled at by a billionaire. Mr. Yamamoto emerged from the private dining room, his expression calm but determined. Behind him, his 3 colleagues followed, their faces serious. They walked across the restaurant in a formation that reminded Maria of diplomats approaching a peace negotiation. "Mr. Rodriguez," Mr. Yamamoto said formally, "my colleagues and I have discussed your business proposal thoroughly. We have reached a unanimous decision." David straightened up, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe they had reconsidered. Maybe there was still a chance to save the deal. "Yes, sir. I'm listening." "We will not be investing in your company," Mr. Yamamoto said simply. "Furthermore, we will be recommending to our network of associates that they also avoid any business partnerships with your organization." The words hit David like physical blows. Not only was he losing this deal, but Mr. Yamamoto was threatening to damage his reputation throughout the entire Asian business community. David's legs felt weak, and he had to grab the back of a chair to steady himself. "But why?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. My company has excellent financials. Our growth projections are conservative and realistic. Our technology is cutting edge, Mr. Yamamoto nodded politely. All of that is true. Your business model is sound, your products are innovative, and your profit margins are impressive. But we do not invest based solely on numbers, Mr. Rodriguez. One of the other Japanese investors stepped forward and spoke in accented but clear English. In our culture, we believe that how a person treats those who can do nothing for them reveals their true character. Tonight, we have seen your true character. David looked around desperately, as if searching for someone who might support him or at least explain what was happening. This is about the waitress? You're destroying a major business deal because of one employee situation? This is about leadership, Mr. Yamamoto replied. A leader who shows no compassion for those struggling beneath him is not someone we can trust with our investment. A man who responds to beauty with anger is not someone who will build lasting value. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the sounds from the kitchen had stopped, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Maria could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet, and she noticed that David's face had gone from red to a sickly pale color. You have to understand, David said, his voice becoming desperate. I was under enormous pressure tonight. This meeting was crucial for my company's future. When I saw an employee violating policy during such an important dinner, I reacted strongly because I had to protect my business interests. Mr. Yamamoto studied David for a long moment, his expression thoughtful but not unkind. Mr. Rodriguez, do you know what that young woman was playing on the piano? David looked confused by the question. I know, it was just some classical piece. I don't really listen to that kind of music. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Mr. Yamamoto said. A piece about finding beauty in sorrow, about hope surviving in darkness. She played it with extraordinary skill and deep emotion. In my country, we would say she has a gift that connects her soul to something greater than herself. David shook his head impatiently. I still don't understand what this has to do with business. Everything, said another of the Japanese investors. Business is about people. Products are created by people, sold to people, used by people. A leader who cannot recognize the humanity in those around him will ultimately fail, no matter how clever his business plan might be. Mr. Yamamoto turned to look at Maria, who had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Young lady, would you please come here? Maria walked toward the group slowly, still not entirely convinced this wasn't some kind of elaborate dream. As she approached, she could see David's expression change from confusion to something approaching panic. Maria, Mr. Yamamoto said gently, I would like to ask you something, and I hope you will answer honestly. If you could have anything in the world right now, what would it be? The question caught Maria completely off guard. She had expected him to ask about her musical training, or her work experience, not about her deepest wishes. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about the medical bills that were due in 3 days, about the dreams she had given up. I would want my mother to be healthy again, she said quietly, and I would want to be able to take care of her without having to worry about money all the time. Mr. Yamamoto nodded, as if this was exactly the answer he had expected. And what about your music? What about your dreams of being a pianist? Maria felt tears starting to form again. Those dreams don't matter anymore. I had to grow up and face reality. My mother needs me to be practical, not to chase impossible dreams. But what if, Mr. Yamamoto said slowly, what if those dreams weren't impossible? What if there was a way to take care of your mother and pursue your music at the same time? The silence that followed his words seemed to stretch on forever. David was staring at them with growing horror, beginning to understand that something much bigger than a canceled business deal was happening here. And Maria was looking at this stranger who had appeared in her life like a guardian angel, afraid to hope for something that seemed too good to be true. Maria stared at Mr. Yamamoto, afraid to believe what she thought she was hearing. I don't understand what you mean, sir. Mr. Yamamoto reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple business card. The paper was thick and elegant, with gold lettering that caught the restaurant's soft lighting. He held it out to Maria with both hands, a gesture of respect that surprised her. "My name is Hiroshi Yamamoto," he said formally. "I am the chairman of the Yamamoto Foundation for the Arts. We provide educational scholarships and support for talented young musicians who face financial hardships." Maria took the card with trembling fingers, reading the words printed there in both English and Japanese. The foundation's address was in Tokyo, but there was also a local office listed right here in the city, a foundation for musicians. "My late wife and I established it 30 years ago," Mr. Yamamoto explained, his voice growing warmer as he spoke about something clearly close to his heart. She believed that musical talent should never be wasted due to poverty or circumstance. Before she passed away, she made me promise to continue her work. David was listening to this conversation with growing alarm. He could see his entire evening spiraling further out of control, but he couldn't figure out how to stop it. "Mr. Yamamoto, surely we can discuss this situation privately. Perhaps we could reschedule our business meeting for another time." But Mr. Yamamoto didn't even glance in David's direction. His attention was completely focused on Maria, as if she was the only person in the room who mattered. "The foundation provides full scholarships for music students," he continued, "including tuition, living expenses, and funding for family emergencies. In exchange, our scholarship recipients perform at benefit concerts and help teach music to underprivileged children." Maria felt dizzy. The words were too good to be true, too perfect to be real. "Sir, I appreciate your kindness, but I can't accept charity. I have responsibilities. My mother needs expensive treatments, and I can't just abandon her to chase my dreams." Mr. Yamamoto smiled gently. "Who said anything about abandoning her? The Foundation's medical assistance program covers family members of our scholarship recipients. Your mother would receive the best possible care, and you would be free to focus on your music studies." The business card felt warm in Maria's hands, as if it was radiating hope. She read it again, trying to convince herself that this was really happening. "You would pay for my mother's treatments? All of them?" "Every single one," Mr. Yamamoto confirmed. "Cancer treatment is expensive, but talent like yours is priceless. My wife always said that investing in a musician's gift pays dividends far beyond money." One of the other Japanese investors stepped forward. "Mr. Yamamoto, please forgive the interruption, but we should explain the full scope of what the foundation offers." Mr. Yamamoto nodded and turned back to Maria. "In addition to your education and your mother's medical care, the foundation would provide you with a Steinway piano for practice similar to this one. We believe that artists need proper instruments to develop their full potential." Maria's knees nearly gave out. Her own piano. Not just any piano, but a Steinway like the one she had just played. She thought about her tiny apartment, imagining the beautiful instrument sitting where her kitchen table currently was. The idea was so wonderful and so impossible that she almost started laughing. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for someone you just met?" Mr. Yamamoto's expression grew serious. "Because 30 minutes ago, I heard my wife's favorite piece played with more emotion and skill than I have heard since she passed away 5 years ago. Because talent like yours appears perhaps once in a generation. And because my wife would never forgive me if I walked away from this moment." David couldn't stay silent any longer. His desperation was overriding his business sense, and he stepped closer to the group. "Mr. Yamamoto, I think you're making a hasty decision based on emotions rather than facts. You don't know anything about this girl's background or her actual musical abilities. One song doesn't prove anything." Mr. Yamamoto finally turned to look at David, and his expression was not friendly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have been evaluating musical talent for 3 decades. I served on the board of the Tokyo Symphony Orchestra for 15 years. I have heard thousands of auditions and performances. I know exceptional ability when I encounter it. But you're talking about spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars based on 5 minutes of music?" David's voice was getting higher as his panic increased. "Money that will change a life and preserve a gift," Mr. Yamamoto replied calmly. Unlike your business deal, this investment will create beauty that will last for generations. Maria was still processing everything she had heard. The scholarship, her mother's medical care, a piano of her own. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that stepping forward would change everything about her life. "Sir," she said carefully, "what would I have to do? What are the requirements?" "Complete your degree at the conservatory," Mr. Yamamoto explained. "Maintain high academic standards. Perform at 4 benefit concerts each year. And teach music lessons to children from low-income families for 10 hours each week." Each requirement sounded not like a burden but like a gift. Maria had always loved teaching, and performing was what she had dreamed of doing her entire life. And my mother would really be taken care of? She would receive treatment at the best cancer center in the state, one of the other investors confirmed. The foundation has partnerships with several world-class medical facilities. Maria closed her eyes and tried to imagine her mother healthy. Again, laughing and singing the way she used to before the illness. She pictured herself back at the conservatory, spending hours each day practicing and learning from master teachers. She saw herself performing on stage, sharing music with audiences who would be moved the way Mr. Yamamoto had been moved tonight. When she opened her eyes, she found Mr. Yamamoto watching her with understanding and patience. "This is overwhelming," she admitted. "I never expected anything like this. I don't even know what to say." "Say that you will consider it," Mr. Yamamoto suggested. "The foundation has an office here in the city. You could visit tomorrow, meet with our local director, and learn more about the program. There is no pressure to decide immediately." David made one last desperate attempt to salvage his evening. "Mr. Yamamoto, I apologize if my reaction to the employee situation seemed harsh. Perhaps I was too quick to judge. If you would give me another chance to discuss our business proposal." Mr. Yamamoto looked at David with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Rodriguez, tonight I have learned everything I need to know about your character. You see a struggling young woman as an annoyance to be removed. I see her as a treasure to be protected and nurtured. We have fundamentally different values, and no amount of discussion will change that." The finality in his voice made it clear that David's business opportunity was gone forever. The billionaire stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of his ambitions, watching as the very person he had tried to destroy was being offered the chance of a lifetime. Mr. Yamamoto pulled out a pen and wrote something on the back of another business card. "This is my personal phone number," he told Maria. "Call me tomorrow after you have had time to think. But please don't take too long to decide. Opportunities like this don't come along often, and life is shorter than we like to believe." Maria looked down at the card, then back up at the kind man who had appeared in her life like a miracle. "Mr. Yamamoto, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said with a smile. "Thank me by becoming the musician I know you can be. Thank me by using your gift to bring beauty into a world that needs it desperately." As the Japanese group prepared to leave the restaurant, Maria realized that her entire future had just been rewritten in the span of a single evening. The piano that had gotten her into trouble had also saved her life, and the man who had tried to destroy her had instead witnessed her rescue. 6 months later, Maria stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her long black performance dress. Through the heavy curtains, she could hear the murmur of 2,000 people taking their seats in one of the world's most famous concert halls. Tonight was the Yamamoto Foundation's annual benefit concert, and Maria was about to perform as the featured soloist. The past half year had been like living in a dream. True to his word, Mr. Yamamoto had arranged everything exactly as he had promised. Maria's mother was receiving treatment at the city's best cancer center, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. The tumors were shrinking, and for the first time in over a year, her mother was able to eat full meals and take short walks around the neighborhood. Maria had returned to the conservatory as a full scholarship student, and her professors were amazed by how much her playing had improved. The months of physical labor had strengthened her hands, and the emotional weight of her struggles had given her music a depth that impressed even her most demanding teachers. She practiced 4 to 6 hours every day on the beautiful Steinway that now filled most of her living room, but tonight was special. Tonight, she would be performing the same Chopin nocturne that had changed her life, along with 2 other pieces that she had spent months perfecting. The benefit concert would raise money to help other young musicians in situations similar to what hers had been. As Maria warmed up her fingers with quiet scales, her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Break a leg tonight, Mia. I'll be watching the live stream from my hospital bed." "I'm so proud of you," the message made Maria smile. Her mother's health had improved enough that she had been able to attend Maria's recitals at the conservatory, sitting in the front row with tears of joy streaming down her face. Seeing her mother happy and hopeful again was worth more than any applause or recognition Maria could ever receive. A stagehand approached her. "5 minutes, Miss Gonzalez. Are you ready?" Maria nodded, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. She had performed in recitals and master classes before, but never on a stage this large, never for an audience this important. The benefit concert was attended by some of the most influential people in the arts world, music critics from major newspapers, and philanthropists who supported young artists. As she prepared to walk onto the stage, Maria thought about the night at Milano's that had changed everything. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but she could still remember every detail: the feel of the piano keys under her fingers, the anger in David's voice, and the kindness in Mr. Yamamoto's eyes when he first spoke to her. The stage manager gave her the signal, and Maria walked out into the bright lights. The concert hall was magnificent, with red velvet seats rising in tiers toward an ornate ceiling painted with angels and clouds. As she approached the grand piano at center stage, the audience fell silent. Maria sat down at the bench and adjusted her position, just as she had been taught during countless hours of practice. She looked out at the sea of faces and found Mr. Yamamoto sitting in the 3rd row, his wife's empty seat beside him marked with a single white rose. He nodded encouragingly, and Maria felt her nervousness melt away. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of the Chopin nocturne filled the concert hall like liquid gold, just as they had filled Milano's restaurant 6 months earlier. But this time, Maria was playing for an audience that had come specifically to hear beautiful music, people who understood and appreciated the emotion she was pouring into every phrase. As the melody developed, Maria lost herself in the music just as she had that night at the restaurant. She thought about her journey from that moment of desperation to this moment of triumph. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led her to this stage, to this piano, to this opportunity to share her gift with the world. In the audience, people were leaning forward in their seats, completely captivated by the young woman's performance. Music critics who had heard thousands of concerts were scribbling notes about the extraordinary talent they were witnessing. Several audience members were quietly wiping away tears, moved by the raw emotion in Maria's playing. But in the back of the concert hall, in one of the less expensive seats, sat someone who looked very different from the confident billionaire who had stormed out of Milano's 6 months earlier. David Rodriguez was thinner than he had been, his clothes were less expensive, and there was a humility in his posture that hadn't been there before. The failure of the Japanese investment deal had been just the beginning of David's problems. Word had spread quickly through the business community about his behavior at Milano's, especially after several diners had posted videos of the confrontation on social media. The footage had gone viral, with millions of people watching David verbally attack a young waitress for playing beautiful music. The public relations disaster had cost him other business opportunities. Potential partners had canceled meetings, existing investors had grown nervous, and his company's stock price had dropped significantly. For the first time in his adult life, David had been forced to confront the possibility that his success might not be permanent, but the worst part hadn't been the financial losses. It had been watching the video of himself, seeing his own face twisted with anger and cruelty, hearing his own voice saying things that made him ashamed to be human. He had shown the video to his teenage daughter during one of their awkward custody visits, and the look of disappointment in her eyes had broken something inside him. That's when David had started to change. He had begun by making small gestures. He started saying please and thank you to service workers. He stopped yelling at his employees when they made mistakes. He even established a scholarship fund at the local community college, though he didn't publicize it or seek recognition. For the donation, when he heard about Maria's benefit concert, David had bought a ticket without really understanding why. Maybe it was curiosity about what had happened to the young woman whose life he had nearly destroyed. Maybe it was a desire to hear the music that Mr. Yamamoto had found so compelling. Or maybe he was hoping to find some way to apologize for his behavior. As Maria's performance reached its emotional climax, David found himself crying. The music was incredibly beautiful, but his tears weren't just about the nocturne. They were about recognizing how wrong he had been, how much beauty he had missed in his life because he had been focused only on money and power. When Maria finished playing, the entire concert hall erupted in applause. People were standing, cheering, calling for an encore. Maria stood and bowed gracefully, her face glowing with joy and accomplishment. She looked out at the audience and saw Mr. Yamamoto standing and applauding with tears in his eyes. After the concert, there was a reception in the lobby where donors and supporters could meet the performers. Maria was surrounded by people congratulating her, offering opportunities for future performances and praising her extraordinary talent. Music school directors were giving her their business cards, and a recording company representative wanted to discuss a possible album. As the crowd around Maria began to thin out, David approached nervously. He had been waiting for over an hour for a chance to speak with her, and he wasn't even sure what he wanted to say. "Excuse me," he said quietly when he finally reached her. "Miss Gonzalez? I don't know if you remember me, but—" Maria turned around and immediately recognized him, though he looked very different from the angry man she remembered from Milano's. "Mr. Rodriguez, yes, I remember you." David's face flushed with embarrassment and shame. "I came here tonight because I wanted to apologize to you. What I did that night was unforgivable, and I've regretted it every day since then." Maria studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear." "Your performance tonight was incredible," David continued. "I understand now what Mr. Yamamoto was trying to tell me about recognizing talent and beauty. I was so focused on my business deal that I completely missed something extraordinary happening right in front of me." "We all make mistakes," Maria said gently. "The important thing is learning from them." David nodded, grateful for her kindness. "I've been trying to learn. I started a scholarship program for students who can't afford college. It's not much, but I wanted to do something positive after causing so much harm." Maria smiled, and for the first time since meeting him, David saw warmth in her expression. "That's wonderful. Education can change people's lives in amazing ways." As their conversation continued, Mr. Yamamoto approached with a gentle smile. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm surprised to see you here tonight." David straightened up, clearly nervous about facing the man whose investment he had lost. "Mr. Yamamoto, I owe you an apology as well. My behavior that night was inexcusable, and I understand why you couldn't do business with someone like me." Mr. Yamamoto considered this for a moment. "And what kind of person are you now, Mr. Rodriguez?" "I'm trying to be better," David said honestly. "I'm trying to remember that business success means nothing if you lose your humanity in the process." Mr. Yamamoto nodded approvingly. "That is wisdom that many people never learn. Perhaps you would be interested in supporting our foundation's work with young musicians?"